You know that great story about a couple who just get married and they're headed out on a honeymoon, but it's before the days of cars, so their form of transportation is a donkey. So the young married man wants to show off to his wife. He goes down to the local donkey rental place and he rents a donkey for the two of them to go on their honeymoon. And of course, it's too expensive to rent two donkeys because, who can afford that? So he rents one donkey and off they go. Now he's thinking to himself, he's a newlywed man. He puts his wife on the donkey and he's walking. As they travel, they come to the first city and the people in the city see him walking next to his wife who is riding on the donkey. So somebody grabs him by the sleeve and pulls him over to the side and says, young man, I can see that you're newlywed. I can see that you just got married. You don't really know how married life works. Let me explain it to you. You have to be the man. You have to show your wife who's boss. And you have to do this from the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to turn into a shmata in the marriage. So this business of your wife riding on the donkey while you walk, it's just not a good idea. You got to show her who's boss. You ride on the donkey and you make her walk. So he does. He takes his wife off the donkey, sits himself on it, and they continue traveling. They come to the next city. Now he's riding on the donkey, and the people see the woman is walking and he's riding. So somebody from the city pulls him by the sleeve and says, young man, I can see you just got married. You don't know what you're doing. Let me explain this to you, he says. This is not the way a man treats his wife. This is not right. You don't make your wife walk while you ride on the donkey. What kind of a husband is that? No good. That's not the way to set up a marriage. So the young man thinks to himself, okay, what are we going to do now? He has an idea. Him and his wife, they both ride the donkey. And as they pull into the third town, this time both of them sitting on it, somebody grabs him by the sleeve and pulls him and says, young man, have you no shame? Have you no pity on the donkey? What is wrong with you? Both of you riding on the donkey? One rides, one walks. You're abusing the donkey. No, so the young man starts thinking to himself, okay, what am I going to do now? He pulls into the fourth town. Now they're both walking and nobody's on the donkey. So somebody from the city sees them both walking. He pulls the young man by the sleeve. He says, young man, I can see you're still young and foolish. You don't know what you're doing in life. I'm sure you rented the donkey for a reason, and now you're both walking. Where's the seichel in that? Was bist du gefallen auf dem Kopf? What, you fell on your head? What's wrong with you? Somebody should be riding the donkey. Why should all of you be walking and nobody riding? And the young man thinks, and as he pulls into the next town, he comes up with an ingenious idea. You know what he does? He tells his wife, come, let's the two of us, you and I, carry the donkey, and the donkey will ride the two of us. And so he walks into the next town with him and his wife with their hands up in the air, holding the donkey, walking in. And all the people of the town shake their heads and they say in Hebrew, Tir'u shtei chamorim nosim sus echad. They say, look at these two donkeys carrying one horse. Look at these two fools. And of course, the anecdote speaks volumes about people who take other people's criticism on a constant basis, and they try to amend themselves based on what they're being told. And one day you're told to do this, and the next day you're told to do that, until you lose your head entirely, and you don't know what it is to do or what is going on. And I say this because today I want to learn with you for a few minutes the first Rashi in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Pinchas. And Rashi tells a story of Jewish critics, of people of the Jewish nation who criticized somebody, and the way the Torah responds to that. And there is great wisdom here and great lesson in terms of how a person learns to deal with those of us in life who have critics. Now, I'm sure most of you don't have critics in life because you're, what would anybody criticize you about? So you'll learn this section of Torah Lishma. But those of us who do have critics, there's a lot to learn here in terms of what it is that you do and how it is that you handle this when something like this happens. So here it is. If you have a Chumash, you can open up to the beginning of Parshas Pinchas, and the Torah begins with talking about this individual called Pinchas. So let's set this up. What's going on? If you stop a Yid in the street who studies Parsha, and you say to him, well, how does the story of Balak, which was, of course, last week's Parsha, how does the story of Balak end? And they'll tell you, what do you mean? It ends with a good day for the Jews. It ends fantastically. Balak, who hired Bilam to curse the Jews, is forced to watch Bilam bless the Jews with the most beautiful brachas that the Torah records. I mean, we put them in davening. Yaakov, Yisrael. He tried repeatedly to curse the Jews again and again, and in the end, he leaves with bizyonis, he leaves with shame, because all of his curses are turned into blessings. Actually, that's most of the story in Parshas Balak, but it's not the end. In the end, when Bilam is unable to curse the Jews, he whispers over to Balak's ear and he gives him a piece of advice. And the piece of advice turns to be incredibly valuable for Balak. And he tells Balak, the king of Moav, he tells him like this. He says, look, you can see, I've obviously not succeeded at cursing the Jews. You can see that. Hashem has forced me to bless them. I thought I was going to be able to find a weak spot. I thought I'd be able to pinpoint the moment when Hashem was upset with the Jews. I couldn't do it. L'chono iyotzcha, says Bilam to Balak, let me give you a shtika le'etza. Let me give you a piece of advice. If you follow my advice, you'll do very well. What's the advice? Bilam says to Balak, look, Elokeim shel elu soinei zimohu, this God of the Jews, he deeply despises immorality. If you can get the Jews to sin with immorality and with idol worship, their God will turn his back on them and you will be able to overcome them. And so the Gemara describes a very elaborate plan of how Moav set into motion an entire operation to get the Jews to sin with immorality and with idol worship. The Gemara says the nation of Moav set up a bazaar. They set up a whole flea market with all sorts of different schayr, with all sorts of different merchandise, and they offered the Jews different deals, different bargains, and they had they had women there to tempt the Jews. And slowly but surely the plan of Moav succeeds, and the Jews, Rahman al-Islam, are lured in to this trap set for them, designed, masterminded by Bilam himself. Until at a critical moment in the end of Parshas Balak, the Jewish people are afflicted with a plague. A plague befalls the Jewish people as an expression of Hashem's displeasure with what's going on. And 24,000, Rahman al-Islam, 24,000 Jews died in this plague. In other words, Moav knew, Balak and Bilam knew that if they picked up a sword to fight with the Jews, Hashem would protect them. So they masterminded a way to get the Jews to sin and to turn Hashem against the Jews, and at least temporarily it worked. And a plague breaks out, and 24,000, of course, the connection between the 24,000 Jews who die in this plague and the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva is sort of glaring. It hits you right in the face. But be it as it may, 24,000 Jews died in this magefa, in this plague brought upon by the sins of the Jews in the end of Parshas Balak. Now, it all reaches a climax, it all reaches a pinnacle point when Moshe Rabbeinu is confronted by a man named Zimri. Zimri was the Nasi, was the head of Shevet Shimon, and he approached Moshe Rabbeinu and he said, Moshe Rabbeinu, this non-Jewish woman from Moav, she was actually a royal non-Jewish woman, her name was Cosby. This non-Jewish woman is permissible to me or forbidden? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, she's forbidden. Ashiksa. Ashiksa, metarnished. Asura, Moshe Rabbeinu said, she's forbidden. Azoi, says Zimri, really? You sure? You want to amend your answer? Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. Are you sure she's forbidden? Of course she's forbidden. She's a shiksa. Asa Zimri, Bas Yisroi mi hitiro lecha. So who allowed you, Moshe Rabbeinu, to marry the daughter of Yisroi? What are you here telling us who we could marry and who we cannot marry? Only descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Bas Yisroi mi hitiro lecha. Who allowed you to marry the daughter of Yisroi? He called him a hypocrite. And in the presence of all the Jews, took Cosby, this non-Jewish woman, into a tent and sinned with her. Of course, it is at this exact moment, Vayar Pinchas, that the Torah introduces us to the hero of the day. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen rises up. Vayikach roimach, he takes a spear and he executes Zimri and Cosby, and the plague ended. The Jewish people came to their senses. They stopped sinning. Hashem's wrath against the Jewish people stopped pouring out. And the story is over. End of story. At least this chapter of the story. Baruch Hashem, no more than 24,000 Jews had died. If not for the actions of Pinchas, only God knows how long this plague could have gone on for. Only God knows what it would have taken for the Jews to wake up and realize that they were playing with spiritual and physical fire. Only God knows how many more Rahman al-Islam korbanos there would have been. Only God knows what would have happened if not for Zimri. By all accounts, Pinchas saved the day. All right, I'm glossing over many details because I'm trying to get to Parshas Pinchas, which is where this Parsha picks up. Parshas Pinchas begins, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer. Hashem speaks to Moshe about Pinchas and refers to him as, quote, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. Hashem would tell Moshe Rabbeinu in the beginning of Parshas Pinchas that Pinchas is going to be rewarded for his heroism, for his act, for saving Klal Yisrael. He's going to be rewarded by becoming a Kohen. He wasn't a Kohen yet, even though he was a descendant of Aaron HaKohen. He becomes a Kohen at this point in time. This was going to be Hashem's message to Moshe Rabbeinu. But even before the Torah gets into it, on the words Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Rashi drops the following bomb. Zokt Rashi. If you have the Rashi in front of you, you can follow along. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, says Rashi, Lefi shehoyu hashvatim mevazim oisai. The Shvatim, the tribes of the Jewish people, were disgracing Pinchas, the man who saved Klal Yisrael. They were disgracing him. They were making fun of him and mocking him. They were criticizing him and being dismissive. What did they say? Quote, Rashi tells us what they said. Ha're'isem ben poiti zeh. Did you see this, quote, ben poiti? This is a non-flattering way of referring to him as the grandson of Yisroi, who Pinchas was. Pinchas was the grandson of Yisroi. Shepitem avi imoy agolim la'avodah zarah. The Shvatim said, this guy Pinchas, his grandfather Yisroi was an idol worshiper. Unishtam, not stam an idol worshiper. He was the connoisseur. He worshipped every avodah zarah in the world. And he fattened calves in order to sacrifice them for avodah zarah. V'horag nosi shevet mi Yisrael. And this guy, a grandson of an avodah zarah, a grandson of a calf fattening, idol worshipping, calf sacrificing man, his grandson killed a nosi shevet mi Yisrael. Killed the leader, the Nasi of a Shevet mi Yisrael, the Nasi of Shevet Shimon. The Shvatim mi Yisrael, the Jewish tribes, were having a field day mocking and not just mocking, and disgracing him. Lefichach bo hakosav b'yachsei achar Aaron. Therefore, says Rashi, the Torah repeats Pinchas's yichus and says, you know who he was? He wasn't just the grandson of an idol worshiper. He wasn't just the grandson of a connoisseur of avodah zarah, fattened calves. He was Pinchas ben Elazar, ben Aharon HaKohen. In fact, I just came from a bris this morning. These words are said at every single bris. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. All right, because of his connection to Eliyahu Hanavi, which is a shiur for a different day. Rashi, on a simple level, what does Rashi want? Rashi is explaining to us why the Torah repeats his yichus. Why do you need to tell me who? We already know that from last week's Parsha. Pinchas was the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, a grandnephew of Moshe Rabbeinu. We already know this. Says Rashi, yes, you already know this, but the Torah repeats it. Because the Torah wants to stress again and again that he was the grandson of Aaron HaKohen. Why is it necessary to repeat? Because Pinchas also had, as they say in Yiddish, another yichus. He also had other yichus. On the other side of his family, he came from Yisroi. And Yisroi was known for, yes, Yisroi was a ger tzedek, absolutely, but he was also known for other stuff. So the Shvatim were walking around and saying, this guy, Pinchas, killed a Nasi me Yisrael, killed a Jewish leader? Who is he? A grandson of some Oived Avodah Zarah. He's going to teach us. He's going to show us. He's a grandson of Yisroi. The Torah says, yes, he's a grandson of Yisroi. But he's also a grandson. He's also Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. I have to interrupt myself and very briefly tell you a good joke. If you've heard it before, I'm sorry. It's a good joke anyways. They say there's a young boy preparing for his bar mitzvah. So at his bar mitzvah speech, he wants to talk about the yichus of the family. He wants to talk about the secrets of the world. He wants to talk about humanity. He wants to talk about all sorts of things. So he comes to his father and he says, Father, where do we come from? Now, the father was a shtikala apikoros. The father wasn't such a big believer. He goes, where do we come from? We come from apes. No, and apes, where do apes come from? He says, apes come from monkeys. And monkeys come from where? Monkeys come from atoms. And atoms come from bacteria. And bacteria comes from and the kid writes it all down in his bar mitzvah speech. Writes. Very nice. He goes to his mother, tell me, where do we come from? His mother is a groiser Ma'amin, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. In our family, we have a tradition that we're all great-great-grandchildren of the Rambam and Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Ever spoke to a Jew? Within 10 minutes, they're descendants of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal and the Rambam and Rab Sadia Gaon and Rab Nissim Gaon and Moshe Rabbeinu himself. So he writes it all down and he tells his mother, I don't understand. Tati tells me we come from apes and bacteria, and you tell me we come from the sons of Rav and the Arizal. Which one is it? She says it's very simple. Tati is talking to you about his side of the family, and I'm talking to you about my side of the family. On his side of the family, apes and bacteria, and on my side of the family, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Akiva. So the Torah is saying the same thing. The Torah is saying this to the Shvatim. You're being mevazeh this guy, you're disgracing him because he's a grandson of Yisroi. That's on one side of his family. On the other side of his family, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Rashi says this is the reason why the Torah repeats it, to defend him from the criticism of Klal Yisrael, who attacked him, who mevazeh him, who shamed him and humiliated him after he had killed a Nasi Shevet Yisrael. This is the end of what's written in Rashi. Now I got 3 questions that I want to ask you. Let's think about this. Question number 1. Why in heaven's name would all of Klal Yisrael criticize the one man who saved their lives? For the love of God, there was a magefa. There was a pandemic out there. 24,000 Jews died. Until Pinchas grows up, did what he did, defended the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu, made all the Jews wake up to what it is that was going on, made Hashem stop the plague, and after that, nobody died. So what would then be the motive for all of Klal Yisrael to then go after and humiliate and disgrace this guy? I mean, what does it take to make a person a Jewish hero for him to get a standing ovation? And by the way, and in doing so, he risks his own life. I mean, think about what he did. First of all, Zimri himself could have killed Pinchas, and anybody who was watching, anybody from Shevet Shimon who wanted to defend their Nasi's honor, could have gone ahead and killed Zimri, could have gone ahead and killed Pinchas. So he risks his own life. Baruch Hashem succeeds. Klal Yisrael has a field day with him. Shtik shegit. What's their problem with the guy? Why do they have an axe to grind with him? Question number one, what did Pinchas do wrong that would make anybody even want to go after him? What was the problem? Why the incentive? What bothered anybody about what Pinchas had done? That's question number one. Question number two, for whatever reason, the Jews, Rashi says, Hashvatim, all the Shvatim, not just Shevet Shimon, all the Shvatim. For whatever reason, the Shvatim felt a need to persecute Pinchas verbally and humiliate and attack him. Okay. So what did they say? They said, your grandfather was an Oved Avodah Zarah, and he fattened calves for sacrificing them to Avodah Zarah. Does somebody want to explain to me, please, how in heaven's name that's even relevant? Why are we talking about this? Pinchas had a grandfather. His grandfather's name was Yisroi. Yisroi traveled a spiritual journey, mind you, which ended very well. Who said Baruch Hashem, and because of that, all the Jews merited to have Matan Torah, and everything ends beautifully. Along the way, he encounters Avodah Zarah and fattened calves for this. So the Shvatim want to be mavazahim, the Shvatim want to humiliate him. Their Tziltman HaMaisa, we tell a story that his grandfather fattened calves for Avodah Zarah. Why are we talking about this? How is that relevant? Let me ask you a question. What Pinchas did was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? What Pinchas did saved Klal Yisrael or didn't save Klal Yisrael? What Pinchas did, it was the will of Hashem or it wasn't the will of Hashem? If it wasn't the will of Hashem, if they believe that Pinchas did the wrong thing, so say Pinchas is a murderer. And if they believe that he did the right thing, then Vasimir Nageya, who cares what his grandfather did? So his grandfather fattened calves, big whoop. A story that happened so long ago. How is that? In other words, if you do want to find something to criticize him about, at least find something relevant. Say he showed up late. I don't know. Say he was walking around the streets without a mask. Say, I don't know, find something to say that's at least relevant for the love of God. Was erzählst du mir meistens mit 100 Jahren zurück? You're telling me a story 100 years ago. His grandfather fattened calves for Avodah Zarah. How is that in any way relevant? In other words, my first question is, why would they want to criticize him? Why would you want to criticize the person who saved your life? And my second question is, if for whatever reason you do feel some deep-seated need to criticize him, so at least find something relevant. His suit doesn't match, his beard is too long, his beard is too short, his yarmulke has too many holes, his yarmulke doesn't have enough holes, his tzitzis has tcheles, don't have tcheles, he davens the right nusach, the wrong nusach, he davens mincha early, he davens mincha late, he davens shachas while it's still dark, he davens ma'ariv while it's still, you find it's not difficult to find something to criticize people about. Question number two, why do they feel a need to criticize him? Question number one, why do they feel a need to criticize him? Question number two, what is the criticism? How is the criticism relevant? And then let's ask a third question. What is the story? Yisroi fattened calves for Avodah Zarah. Okay, Yisroi fattened calves for Avodah Zarah. But after he fattened calves for Avodah Zarah, he rejected those Avodah Zarahs and became a God-loving, God-fearing Ger Tzedek. Ato Yodati, Yisroi said, now I know, Ki Godel Hashem Mikol Elokim, that Hashem is the greatest God. And he knew what he was talking about because he worshipped every other Avodah Zarah in the world. So if we are going to talk about Yisroi, how is that even a criticism? Yisroi was the one man who had enough integrity, who had enough stamina to go through every sheker in the world until eventually he finally discovered the truth and embraced it. No? So if you are going to trace his yichus to Yisroi, actually, that's not bad yichus. That's fantastic yichus. The Gemara says until Yisroi came to Klal Yisrael, Hashem couldn't give the Torah to Klal Yisrael. So Yisroi in the end is the one who's responsible for giving Torah to Klal Yisrael? Actually, that sounds pretty good to me. Why the need for the Torah to say, no. He wasn't just the grandson of Yisroi. He was also the grandson of Aaron HaKohen. Okay, he was the grandson of Aaron HaKohen, Beseder. But actually, if you think about it, what's wrong with his yichus by Yisroi? Was ist schlecht? Yisroi zeichet gewen Gora feine Yid. What's the problem with that? If the need to defend Yisroi, if the need to defend Pinchas, it doesn't seem necessary to go to the other side of his family and to say there was yichus on the other side. It seems like this side of the family did pretty good too. And yet the Torah insists, no, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. Okay. So again, question number one, why did they want to humiliate him and criticize him? Question number two, why are they criticizing him with something that doesn't seem relevant at all? And question number three, why is the Torah defending him by saying he was also a grandson of Aaron HaKohen? The yichus to Yisroi doesn't seem that bad. In fact, it seems fantastic. In fact, we can even argue maybe Yisroi's yichus is greater than Aaron, because Aaron was there before Yisroi came, and Hashem still couldn't give the Torah to the Jews until Yisroi came. So maybe in that sense, Yisroi is even greater. What is the meaning of this first Rashi in Parshas Pinchas? Okay, so here is an insight. Here's an idea. There was something the Meforshim explain that was bothering the Jews. There was something that was disturbing them very deeply about the story of Pinchas. Yes, it's true, Pinchas saved the day. Yes, it's true, Pinchas saved Klal Yisrael. 24,000 Jews died before Pinchas showed up. Yes, it's true, Yisroi was a hero. But something bothered the Jews about it, because as much as Pinchas, yes, it's true, Pinchas was a hero. But as much as it's true that Pinchas was a hero, actually, we've never heard of Pinchas before. Not really. He kind of came out of nowhere. Pinchas is Johnny come lately.
He's having such fun.
Yes, I am. So Pinchas says, so the Klal Yisrael say, here's what happened. There was a crisis. And Jews were dying. Nobody knew what to do. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself, the Gemara says, Nis'almu mimenu halacha, forgot the halacha. And all of a sudden, Pinchas shows up, and Pinchas saves the day. Wait a second, say all of Klal Yisrael. You know better than Moshe Rabbeinu? You know better than Aaron HaKohen? You know better than 71 members of the Sanhedrin of Moshe Rabbeinu who were chosen through a goyrel? You, a shtick schnook, came out of nowhere? You saved the day? Who are you? Who asked you? Why do you think that all of a sudden you're supposed to be the guy who rides into town, shining armor, big white horse. Oh, here I come to save everybody. Klal Yisrael said, yes, you saved the day. But in the process, Klal Yisrael said to Pinchas, you disgraced Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu stands there, doesn't know what to do. Aaron HaKohen stands there, doesn't know what to do. The entire Sanhedrin, and picture the scene. All the rabbis with long beards and with short beards, everybody standing around going like this. Nobody knows. And Pinchas shows up. And Pinchas knows. And Pinchas takes matters in his own hands. And Pinchas saves the day. And the Shvatim said, yes, very nice. But in the process, they said to Pinchas, we got to ask you a question. Did it not cross your mind that if everybody else is doing nothing, if everybody else is paralyzed, if everybody else is gripped with fear, did it not cross your mind that you're not Moshe Grois, that you shouldn't be the one to take over the scene? Did it ever cross your mind? That you're not the leader of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael has leaders. Did that ever cross your mind? Pinchas said, if he even responded, Pinchas said, what do you mean? I saw what needed to be done and I did it. The Shvatim felt the need to defend the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Shvatim felt the need to defend the honor of the rabbis and all those people who stood there and did nothing. The Shvatim felt that Pinchas's actions had made all the leaders of the Jewish people look bad. And so they went and they started to do what Jews do best. They started to psychoanalyze him and say, wait, what is it bedafka about Pinchas? What is it bedafka about Pinchas that made him the one to grab a sword, rush forward and murder two human beings? What was it about him? Again, not much is known about this guy. The Torah hasn't told us much about him at all. So they start digging into his yichus and they make a discovery. What's the discovery? Pitem ovi imoya golim lavodah zorah. They said his mother's father, Yisroi, fattened calves for avodah zorah. He fattened calves and then slaughtered them. How is that relevant? They said, the Shvatim said, we found a trace of cruelty in Pinchas's lineage. We found cruelty in his DNA. And nishtam cruelty from a goy, for the sake of avodah zorah. They said, that explains everything. That explains it all. Now we know why Pinchas was the one who grabbed the sword and rushed forward. Why? Because there's cruelty in his DNA. His mother's father fattened calves for avodah zorah. And so he must have yarshened this quality of cruelty somewhere, and because of that, he felt it right, he felt the rush, the adrenaline rush to go forward and to murder these two people. It wasn't the deed that Pinchas did that the Shvatim criticized. Pinchas did the right thing. That wasn't challenged. It wasn't the fact that Pinchas saved Klal Yisrael that was challenged. Nobody argued that. They didn't say Pinchas was guilty of murdering innocent people because they knew he wasn't. So what do you do when you can't criticize somebody's actions? You know what you do? You criticize their motives and their intentions. And they justified themselves in doing so. They said, we're not criticizing Pinchas's motives and intentions because we're bad people. We're not criticizing Pinchas because we're ungrateful. We're not criticizing Pinchas because we don't acknowledge that he saved the day. You know why we're criticizing Pinchas? Because we're here to defend the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're doing a mitzvah. We can't allow this guy who's come here out of nowhere to disgrace our Talmidei Chachamim and our leaders this way. Yes, he did the right thing. But we're going to defend the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to criticize his motives and say that he inherited cruel traits, cruelty, the ability to be cruel. And because of that, Badafka he was the one who remembered this halacha, that you have to kill people who are involved in this kind of an avay.
She moved out and she invested $5,000 to fix the place.
So, were the Shvatim right or were the Shvatim wrong? The Torah says they were wrong. The Torah says they were wrong. but they were trying to defend the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu. They meant well. Their motive, what they were trying to do, seems justified. They were standing up for Kavod HaTorah. What's wrong with that? Hashem wasn't pleased with the fact that the Shvatim disgraced Pinchas. Hashem said, you're making a mistake. What was the mistake of the Shvatim? 3 points. Number one, there comes a time for every Jew where they look around themselves and they see something that needs to be done. They see a stand that needs to be taken. They see something that needs to be said. They see a position that needs to be articulated. They look around themselves and they wring their heads and they say, Ribono Shel Olam, nobody's doing anything. Nobody's saying anything. I see the injustice with my own 2 eyes, and even the greatest leaders of Klal Yisrael are not saying or doing anything. They're silent. And at that point, the person may ask themselves, may question themselves and say, maybe there's something wrong with me. I see the injustice. I see the crime. I see the abuse that's going on. I feel like I need to do or say something, but nobody else is doing anything. And so they may say to themselves, you know what? If the greatest rabbis and the greatest leaders and the greatest chachomim and all the king's horses and all the king's men, if nobody's budging or nobody's moving, perhaps neither should I. Perhaps I should take a lesson from them and sit on my hands and sit this out. And the Torah says, absolutely not. Rachmana litzlan. No way. You may be a Pinchas that nobody's ever heard of before. You may be a Pinchas who never got more than 2 seconds of airspace in the Torah before. Nobody's ever heard of you. You may be Johnny come lately. If you see something, if you see an injustice, if you see, Rachmana litzlan, Jewish people are dying and somebody needs to do something and you have the ability to do it, then this may be your moment. This may be orchestrated by Hashem for you. This may be your moment where you will make an impact on Klal Yisrael and be remembered for all times. Don't stand there scratching your head, asking yourself why Moshe Rabbeinu himself and everybody else, the entire Sanhedrin, is doing nothing. You know why Moshe Rabbeinu forgot the halacha, the Gemara says? You know why Hashem made Moshe Rabbeinu forget the halacha? Why? The one who taught Torah to all of Klal Yisrael, Hashem made him forget it. Why? So that Pinchas would have his moment and do what was right. If you see something, if you see a Jewish life that needs to be saved, and it's in front of you, and it's clear, and it's there, the fact that other people aren't doing anything about it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. The moment was orchestrated and brought to you by Hashem perfectly. This is your moment. Do what you need to do. Do it now. Save the life of another Yid. Don't let other people's inactivity be your guiding light in terms of what it is that you need to do. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2. If you do something and you save Jewish lives and you speak out against an injustice and against stuff that's going on that shouldn't be, if and when you speak out and you stand up and you save Klal Yisrael, don't think you're going to get a standing ovation for it. Don't think you're going to get a dinner where they're going to honor you and present you with medals and hail you as the hero who saved Klal Yisrael. Don't think you're going to get a yasher koyach or a thank you. Don't think that the Jewish people are going to remain indebted to you for all eternity. That's not what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen? You're going to get criticism. You're going to be mocked. You're going to get humiliation. And you're going to get people going, ha! This guy, I remember his grandfather. His grandfather was an Oved Avodah Zorah. And people are going to tell you, you had no right to do what you did. They may be right. They may be wrong. It's not your concern. You see, my friends, the Torah is teaching us that criticism is not about the person being critiqued. Criticism is about the critic. Always. Of course, I have to repeat that famous word of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was once speaking on Purim, and he said, what's the last thing the Torah tells us about Mordechai at the end of the Megillah? What's the last thing the Torah says? The last thing the Torah says is that Mordechai was Rotzei L'Roiv Echav. Most of his brothers liked him. And the Gemara says, Rashi quotes it, Roiv Echav, V'loi Kol Echav. Some of the members of the Sanhedrin, some of the rabbis of the times didn't approve of Mordechai. They didn't like what he had done. They had something to say about him. They said rabbis shouldn't be involved in politics, go figure. And so they critiqued him for it, and the Rebbe asked, okay, it's true, there were some people who didn't approve of what Mordechai did or said or his methods or his means, whatever. But that's the last thing you have to tell me at the end of the whole Megillah? Right at the end? After he and Esther single-handedly, physically saved the lives of every Jewish man, woman, and child who were destined to be annihilated in a single day? The last thing you have to tell me about Mordechai is that some Jews curled their noses at him and said he's no good. That's the last thing you have to say? Why? Why not finish on a good note and say the Jewish people, they paid his pension plan and they let him retire in a nice apartment in Yerushalayim where he could go to the Kosel every morning and say Tehillim and gave him a good life. No, says the Megillah. No, the Jews wouldn't let him go till his last day. Till the last pasuk in the Megillah. Some of the brothers, some of the Jews were going, this guy has no right to be involved in politics. Why? Why is that the last thing the Torah says? Said the Rebbe, you know why? Because it's the Torah's way of teaching us that when you do something, and when you do something good, and when you do something extraordinarily good, when you save Klal Yisrael, you're going to get criticized for it. And you're going to get humiliated for it. And people are going to point fingers and have all sorts of things to say about you. Why is that important for us to know? It's important for us to know because the Torah is telling us and begging with every yid, when you do the right thing, when you do what it is that Hashem wants from you, other people will mock you or disgrace you or humiliate you for it. Don't take heed. Don't get discouraged. Don't lose heart. Don't take notice. Don't take it personally. Don't let it get to you. You saved Klal Yisrael. Oh, says the Rebbe, you want to make sure you don't get criticized? You want to make sure that nobody has a bad word to say about you? There's only one way to make sure you'll never get criticized. And you know what that is? Sit at home all day and do nothing. And then nobody will have a bad word to say about you. Well, among Jewish people, even then, somebody will still find a bad word to say about you. But it'll be much less because you're not doing anything. And when you come upstairs after 120, the Ribbono Shel Olam will say, what was your greatest accomplishment in life? And you'll say, nobody said anything bad about me. And the Ribbono Shel Olam will say, really, how'd you manage that? Nobody gets spared. Among the Jewish people, nobody gets spared. If you do, you will be criticized for it. It's the way it's always been. It's the way it always will be. And it doesn't mean you did the wrong thing. It doesn't mean that you didn't save Klal Yisrael. It doesn't mean that this wasn't your moment to rise up in history and earn your Parsha in Torah. It doesn't mean the critics have any merit at all. But it does mean that for whatever God-known reason, you will be the subject of criticism and the object of criticism. And the Torah is telling us, in Pinchas' case, it didn't get in his way. And then there is, of course, the third and most important lesson. Yes, the Shvatim justified their own criticism. Yes, the Shvatim insisted the reason why we're criticizing Pinchas is because we're trying to defend Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen. Yes, the Shvatim had all the most noble reasons for why they buried Pinchas in humiliation. Every critic always does justify their own criticism. Every critic always does have a rap sheet of reasons why they are fulfilling the will of Hashem by critiquing and criticizing and putting down those who do good. Every critic will tell you that the person they're criticizing needs to be shut down for all the most holy and noble reasons in the world. Every critic justifies themselves to themselves for what they do. But it's not the truth. It's not the truth. What do you think is the real reason why the Shvatim disgraced Pinchas? Why were they so upset with him? What was the real reason? Because Pinchas, by doing what he did, by standing up for what's right, made everybody else who didn't do anything and who didn't stand up for what's right uncomfortable with their own inactivity. They looked at themselves and they said to themselves, wait a second, where was I? I should have done that. How did I let 24,000 Jewish people die without doing anything? What is wrong with me? And so Klal Yisrael, when Pinchas did what he did, found themselves in a difficult position. They had to face a painful truth about themselves, that they had dropped the ball and hadn't been there when Klal Yisrael needed them. And that's a bitter and painful truth to swallow. You know what's much easier than swallowing a bitter and painful truth about yourself? Deflecting and criticizing and going, he only did it because he's cruel. I remember his Zayda. His Zayda was also cruel. Mistama, he's cruel because his Zayda is cruel. And the critic's real motive, not the critic's stated motive. The critic's stated motive is always noble and holy. But the critic's real motive, what's really bothering them, is their own guilt at their own inactivity. The critics look at themselves and say, how did I not do this? How did I allow this to go on? What does he have that I don't got? And so the critic is forced to come up with an answer. And in this case, they did. They'll dig. The critic will, by the way, the critic will dig as deep as necessary until they find dirt. And when they find it, they'll parade it all over the town and say, this is the reason why Yankel did such and such, and not me. And so the Shvatim went digging, and they found a cruel grandfather of Pinchas. His name was Yisro, or at least their perception of it, and they criticized him for it. In an effort, perhaps subconsciously, to make themselves feel better for the fact that nobody did anything other than Pinchas. And so the Torah and Hashem himself responds to this criticism. In the opening psukim of Parshas Pinchas, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, Hashem said to Moshe, oh boy, are you guys mistaken. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. You know why Pinchas was the one who stood up when nobody did? You know why Pinchas was the one who couldn't see Jews die and not do anything? You know why Pinchas was the one who had the fire under his chair and got up and sprung to action when nobody? You know why it was him? Because he had the traits of Aaron HaKohen, who was Oyev Shalom, V'roidev Shalom, He was motivated by love for a fellow Jew like nobody else was. And that made this Pinchas's moment. And it made him the moment where he became a Kohen, who him and his descendants would for all eternity bless the Jewish people ba'ava and bless the Jewish people with Pinchas serves as an all-time icon of a man who saw of a Yid who saw what needed to be done and did it. He took action when it needed to be taken. He becomes the eternal icon of the Yid who did it when nobody else was doing anything. He spoke out against the injustice when nobody else had the guts or nobody else could or nobody else remembered. Pinchas stands out at that one Yid who saw it and did it and saved Klal Yisrael and was rewarded by Hashem for it. And he's the one who teaches us at every juncture in life that it's not criticism and different opinions that will ever teach us and tell us that we can rely on to tell, there are some politicians who are constantly saying what it is that people want them to say. They're constantly taking a poll. What do people want me to say today? And what do people want me to say tomorrow? Pnei hadoir ki pnei hakelev, the commentaries say, a dog is always running ahead of its master, but it's always looking back over its shoulder to see which way its master wants it to go. There are some leaders who don't have the guts, who don't have the courage to stand up and do and say what it is that needs to be done and said, even when it's unpopular, even when they will be humiliated and disgraced for it. They don't have it within themselves. They are not the Pinchases of the world. They are not the Mordechais of the world. The Pinchases of the world are those who will stand up when all of Klal Yisrael disgrace him because of their own complex, because of their own unresolved issues, because of their own guilt, because of their own discomfort. Because what he's doing makes them look bad. And so when they criticize him and when they humiliate him, Pinchas is the one who will stand up and say, this is not about me. I did what the Rabbeinu Shalom wanted me to do at this time. And even the Rabbeinu Shalom himself will testify on Pinchas's behalf. It's the Torah's way of teaching us that at some point in our lives, at some point in our year, at some point in our month, at some point even in our day, we will come to a Pinchas moment. And at that moment, we have all the most wonderful excuses in the world. We can justify ourselves for not doing by saying it won't be appreciated, and it won't be. We can justify ourselves by saying people will mock and deride what I'm doing, and they will. We can excuse ourselves and say, but look how many people are not doing anything. Why should I be the one? Why should I take the fall for Klal Yisrael? It's not my job. I don't get paid for it. If you make all those excuses, you'll be right. You may even save yourself a lot of criticism. But a Pinchas you won't be. A Pinchas you won't be. Instead, every one of us is called upon to be, in the words of the Torah, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Learn from Aaron. Learn to love another Jew. Learn to care. Learn to be ready to make sacrifices, to do what it takes to bring Ava, to bring Shalom between Jews. Sometimes that means taking Roimach B'yodai. Sometimes that means taking a spear in hand and being ready to say things that will not be met with happiness, that will not be met with appreciation. But those people are the Kohanim. Those people are the Jewish leaders and the ones from whom we learn an example for all times and forever. Those become the Mordechais and the Pinchases of the Jewish people. May Hashem help us that we learn from Pinchas and his example. We learn not to get discouraged when we're criticized for doing the right thing. We learn not to see it as an indication necessarily that we're doing the wrong thing. That we remember that a critic criticizes because of his or her own stuff, and it's not necessarily reflective on us. May we always remember the real lesson of Pinchas, which is that every neshama, every soul comes into this world with a mission, with something it needs to do. When that moment comes, the world will stand still, waiting for us to do our God-given mission, our God-given shlichus, our God-given mandate in this world. And may Hashem help us that we do so successfully. I want to wish you all a wonderful Shabbos.